All right. Well, for those of you watching the recording right now, hi, I'm Ish. Nice to meet you all. I'm taking over for Amber for these last 4 weeks of your cohort. Super exciting because my last cohort was the one that just finished Capstones before you all. So all of this Capstone stuff is like fresh in my mind. So happy to just jump right in and finish out your projects. I wanted to point out a couple changes to the schedule. I know for a couple weeks, your meetings were a bit later. So because we only have 4 more weeks of study groups left, it's going to be a little bit inconsistent, but our Wednesday sessions will go back to 7 to 8 for the next 4 weeks. So these will be our weekly cohort stand-up. So these will be 7 to 8 Eastern on Wednesdays. And then I know you guys typically do Mondays, but for the next 2 weeks, because this coming Monday, I'm actually out of office. I'm attending a wedding on Sunday, so I have to fly on Monday. So unfortunately, can't do Monday. So I'm going to move our study group next week and the week after, because week after is Memorial Day. So the next 2 Monday study groups are going to be on Tuesdays, 7 to 8 Eastern. I hear that 7 to 8 is better for more people in this cohort. I think that's what Amber mentioned. So that's what the time is going to be. I'm going to put this all in the Slack channel as well. So there's a note of that. And then our last week of study groups, phase 5, week 8, will be back to same as this week. I know it's a little bit confusing, but I will put all the timings weekly in the Slack channel so we all remember when they are. Cool. So in terms of what we're doing during these study groups, the Wednesdays are still going to be the stand-ups. I really like the system that Amber has set up for you all. So we're going to keep doing that. And then in terms of the topics, I'm thinking today we talk about dashboarding. Next week, I am thinking as a good extension from dashboarding, talking about front ends, like how you can actually take your project, turn it into like a web application and put that on like a website or something that you can potentially link on your LinkedIn or on your resume or on your GitHub so that people can, test out your project and see how it works. Again, might not be applicable for every project, but there are a few different kinds. And so we'll talk through those next week. The week after, I do want to get a sense of what y'all's projects are first. Usually during these office hours, I like to do like either topic deep dives or I can also talk about, things to think about when you're putting together resumes. But so depending on what your projects are looking like, this one I'll leave as TBD for now. But the last one, for the very last study group, I like to talk about data science interviews. The kinds of interviews you can expect, the kinds of things that you should prepare for each different kind of interview. For each of these, I have like a Google Doc with a lot of that information, which I will share with you all when we go through this information. So that will be then. If anyone has any requests or big questions that you would like me to talk about, we can definitely talk about them during these times. We can definitely also talk about them during stand-up times. So just let me know. Pretty flexible especially when it comes to these like capstone office hours. So yeah, I think that's all. Oh, the one more thing is in your Slack channel, I sent over that zip file. So that zip file, we're going to talk about some of it today and then some of it next week, because that is basically like a bunch of templates of front ends. I would say when creating a front end, especially as a data science student, not as a software engineering student, best to go off a template. And those templates are actually my old projects. I've taken out most of like the sensitive stuff, but those are templates from my old projects that I will talk through and show you all how to, edit to make your own. So that's what I'll be talking about today and also next week. So I feel like, if at some point you want to make a front end, just download that zip file. It's pretty big. I haven't looked into what's making that file so big, but yeah, if you want to make a front end, I do recommend downloading that zip file. Cool. Any questions regarding, I don't know, any of what I had just mentioned? Sweet. All right, so let's get into JupyterDash, which is the thing I wanted to talk about today. So I sent you all a GitHub link to, this is the repo for the cohort that graduates right before you guys. So most of the stuff is up to date. So if you want to just look through some of my old material, I actually sourced some of Amber's notes as well. So there's probably going to be some overlap, but I have some notebooks in here that, I don't know, if you feel like, feel free to peruse all of that if you want. But yeah, the one I want to talk about is JupyterDash. And what JupyterDash is, it is sort of like an in-between dashboarding software where it allows you to start building your dashboard within your Jupyter notebook. We'll see next week that like when you're trying to make a front end, debugging a front end is very, very difficult. I think one of the beauties of Jupyter Notebook is that you can run things cell by cell and you don't have to like close everything and relaunch it every time you make a change, which is what you have to do with some front ends. So JupyterDash makes it a little bit easier. If you're thinking of doing some sort of dashboard, I do recommend doing it in JupyterDash first. And then at the end of this, I'll talk about how you can turn JupyterDash into a real dashboard. I guess it would be helpful to show you what a JupyterDash looks like. So this is all the code, and I'll talk through all of this. I know it looks like a lot, but this is an example of a JupyterDash dashboard. So as you can see here, we have a bunch of interactive graphs, pretty neat. So what this is basically a bunch of indicators for a bunch of countries. The functionality here is you can choose between different indicators. So for example, let's take a look at GDP growth. And here we are going to look at GDP growth versus, life expectancy. So this is some functionality where we're looking at the relationship between GDP growth, life expectancy. Here we have like a scatter plot. And every time we hover over the scatter plot, you can see that the line graphs on the side here update based on the last thing that we hovered over. That's pretty neat. So for example, this is the country Bhutan. You can see the growth in GDP and the change in life expectancy over time. So that's some functionality. Other functionality we have here, we can see if we want to look at this on a linear or a log scale. Just some metrics look better in a log scale. I think these two don't really make a big difference. And then one more functionality you have here is time frame. You can look at different time frames. So of course, very, very customizable and looks pretty intense now, but I'll talk through the different components that make up something like this. So perhaps, if you feel like your data has a lot of good EDA that you want to show, especially something that, has like many different, maybe you have like different columns that you want to show differently in an interactive way, could consider throwing it in a dashboard. What this is built off of, if anyone has heard of the library Plotly, I know we didn't really talk about Plotly in our curriculum, but it's an alternative to Matplotlib and Seaborn. I actually personally use Plotly for most of my graphs just because each Plotly graph is interactive like this. And the syntax is actually pretty straightforward. I think as like a quick example, let me see if I have Plotly Express here. Okay, yeah. So if you look up like Plotly Express for graphs, and let me just pull up their documentation to show you all. Plotly Express. I feel like the documentation for Plotly is a lot nicer than Matplotlib and Seaborn. If anyone has ever tried to like read that documentation, I know it's not the easiest to read, but as a quick example, let's see. Okay, scatter plots in Plotly Express. Very similar syntax to Seaborn, I think, but this is just a regular Plotly graph outside of the dashboard. I just think it looks nicer. I like the fact that you can hover over. So I feel like if you want to, if you're intending on making like a dashboard, Plotly is a great way to just start, because if you're doing your EDA graphs in Plotly, when it comes to taking your EDA graphs and turning them into a dashboard, it's really just a matter of copy and pasting your code. So yeah, there's a lot of functionality here. I think like the default like fonts and titles and colors are also just nicer in my opinion. So yeah, I feel like it's not a big learning curve, especially if you've been using Matplotlib and Seaborn already. I don't think it's a big learning curve going from those to Plotly. So I do recommend this. The only downside is it doesn't render in GitHub, which is, I don't think is a big deal. It just doesn't render because it is like a HTML interactive element. It doesn't render in GitHub. So if you wanted to show it in GitHub, you would have to like do like screenshots. So that's the only downside. But yeah, just an alternative to plotting. Cool. So JupyterDash is built off of Plotly. And JupyterDash is actually used in the industry. So as an example, I do a bunch of contract work aside from teaching I guess I have a lot of free time, and I have been tasked to create dashboards using Dash. So use that as evidence that it is used in real life. Cool. Any questions on like the setup of JupyterDash? Nice. All right. Hi, everybody. It looks like there are more people here. Hi, I'm Ish. I look forward to getting to know more of your projects, and I guess you all as well, on Wednesday and also at your one-on-ones. So I'll take this as a break to ask you all to schedule one-on-ones with me via my link. All right. So let's talk about how we create this dashboard. So again, a lot of interactive elements. One, I really like the hover. I like that you can show, different graphs in just like one dashboard. Also, I guess one more selling point, if you want to turn this into a dashboard on a website, it's really a matter of just copying and pasting this code into somewhere else. And I'll talk about that at the very end of the session. Cool. All right, so things to think about when you're setting up JupyterDash. So first, you want to get all your data in as clean a format as possible. So this is actually the example from JupyterDash's documentation. They actually have this CSV here where it's just a bunch of indicators from a bunch of different countries across different years. So data probably not best stored in this format, but basically you have a bunch of different countries, different indicators. So you can see like for the Arab world, there are these different indicators, and they have that data for many different years, and also like the values. So basically 3 variables. Get the data in as clean a format as you want or need, and this will make more sense as you're creating the graphs, which is why I do recommend that before you even start building your dashboard, be able to plot the graphs that you want to see on your dashboard first. So once you do that, that'll make your life a lot easier later. So you're not debugging dashboard code with just Plotly code as well. So I guess as a first step, make sure you can plot what it is you want to plot just separately, not on a dashboard. Next, I would say even before you get into the code, really just think about the layout of your dashboard. This part is very, very underrated. Like literally think about, okay, on my dashboard, I want to have 3 graphs laid out this way. Not just that, but also what kind of functionality do you want it to have? So in this example, okay, I want to give it like drop-down lists to be able to select the indicators. So keep that in mind as well. Where do you want the drop-down list to be located? That is something that you should think about too. I want this functionality to change from linear to log relationship. Think about that as well. Like literally draw in as much detail as you can. I tell students like, even take a piece of paper or like on a PowerPoint presentation, just like lay out your dashboard, because that will make your life a lot easier as you're trying to put it together in code, just so you can go off of some sort of like design specs to build your dashboard later on. Again, I'm not a designer, but just at least having a plan of attack will make it easier to construct your dashboard. All right, so I think those are all like the prelim things to think about. Mainly design your dashboard, make sure you can plot the plots just separately away from your dashboard first. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually run through what all of this code is. It is pretty daunting, but also kind of impressive that only like this large cell block is able to create this entire interactive thing. And this comes in several different parts that I'm going to explain in a little bit. So first, if you're just setting up your dashboard, you just need this code. To be honest, I'm also not sure what this line of code does, but it just instantiates your dashboard. So this code should always be somewhere in your notebook. This code has to be run first in order for your dashboard to even load up. And as part of this code, there are a couple main sections. So here you can see that there's an app.layout. So this is the very first variable. The very first variable in this cell is app.layout. And this literally lays out your dashboard. And I'll talk about this in a little bit, but the layout is basically defined here. Let me double check. Nope, the layout is actually all of here. So this entire thing is the layout of the graph. Later, I'm going to put this side by side with our JupyterDash, and we can actually compare and say like, all right, this part refers to this part. So we'll do that in a little bit. And then this part here, and actually all down here, these are called callbacks. And why they're called callbacks is because you see this little @app.callback. This is what defines the interactive elements between your dashboard, between different parts of your dashboard. Just callbacks are basically, you know, when I update something here, it knows to update something in the graphs here, here, and here. So those are what callbacks are. So as you're designing your dashboard, also think about your callbacks. Like if you say, okay, I want to drop down list here. What is the drop down list going to affect? So keep that in mind too. In a dashboard, especially like those really complicated dashboards, you're going to have a lot of callbacks. And in this one, I think I have just 2 or 3. Let's see. Oh, more. 1, 2, 3 callbacks. One good thing to remember is within this code, I would say, so let me just zoom out so it's easier to see it as a whole. So this whole thing, this app.layout is one variable, right? So this is one variable. Each callback is a separate function. So you can see under every app callback, I have a function. I'll talk about syntax in a little bit too. But it's also good to know that if you ever needed to write functions to pre-process your data frame in a certain way, you can stick that code anywhere here. I would say not within the definition of your layout, but if you wanted to write a function, I think I do have one here. Right, okay. So I have a time series function here that I just used to clean up the time series that can exist within this code as well. So this code doesn't specifically have to be strictly dashboarding code. You can have other Python functions. If you find that you need like a level of pre-processing, that can be done here as well. All right, I'm very aware that I'm talking like kind of briefly about a lot of different things, but they will kind of come together in a little bit. All right, let me first talk about the run server. Let me zoom back in. Okay, so app.run server is basically the line that runs your dashboard. There are a couple ways that you can run it. If you do, you can see here mode inline basically outputs your dashboard on your Jupyter notebook, which is pretty helpful for debugging. Other ways to do it, if you have Jupyter Lab, I know Amber is a fan of Jupyter Lab. If you use Jupyter Lab, you can actually launch it in a new Jupyter Lab tab. So I don't do that, but here I pulled this up. Let's see. I had pulled this up there. If you do it mode Jupyter Lab, it opens up in a Jupyter Lab tab. I'm going to link this all to you guys later as well, but this is the official introducing JupyterDash from Plotly that they wrote. So I think the other one that I want to run now, let's see if I remember correctly. If I do mode external, see, okay. So I do mode external, it actually launches my my dashboard in a new tab. And I actually want to reshare my screen so we can look at this side by side. Give me a quick second to resize all of my windows. And then we can look at it side by side and talk about how the dashboard design goes hand in hand with how we're doing the layout. All right, so new share desktop. Okay, hopefully you all see 2 windows. Yeah, okay, awesome, thank you. All right, so this is gonna be a little bit messy, but we're gonna talk about how the layout corresponds with what we have here. So let me zoom out. Usually I have a giant screen, but I don't have my big screen with me currently. So let's look at it this way. Okay. So here we basically have our 3 graphs top section as well. Okay. So if anyone is familiar with HTML, and again, you don't have to be familiar with HTML for this program at all, but if you're familiar with HTML, this might make a little bit more sense. When I was learning this, I did not know HTML either, so it took me a while to like familiarize myself. But HTML is basically structured in the form of divs, and everything within a div goes up top to bottom. It just stacks on top of each other. That's how I understand it. So here I basically have divs nested within divs. And it's sort of helped by how it's indented. So you can see that the app layout, the whole thing is an HTML.div. Within this large div, I think I have a couple smaller divs. So I have one here, and this div actually, this div up here, which goes from here to here, and I can see that based on where the parentheses are highlighted green. I know it's kind of small on your screen probably, but this first div is just for this top gray bar up here. So it has like the two drop-down lists and the two like, these are called radio items. So these two like linear or log. So all of these elements, these 1, 2, 3, 4 elements are in this top div. So within this top div, which is right here, you can see that there are actually two divs within this large div. So we have actually this div here, which is our left div, and this is our right div. How I know it's left and right is because this one takes up 49% of the width, and then this one also takes 49% of the width, and then leans it right. I know that's confusing, but if I feel like if you want to do something similar to this, feel free to copy and paste and just change it to your own thing. So this is the two things on the left. And by the two things, I mean by this drop-down list and this set of radio items. So you can sort of see that here. There's dcc.dropdown and dcc.radio items. What DCC is actually, it stands for Dash Core Component. And that's actually really neat because within Dash, let's see, where is Dash Core Components? Dash Core Components. Dash Core Components is basically the set of all kind of items that you can create within your dashboard. So there's a bunch of different components that you can have. So very similarly to what we had here, we had drop down. Others, you can have sliders, range sliders. I think this is the one that we have at the bottom here. You can even put like text input. You can have a text area, checkboxes. There are a lot of different components that you can have. So when designing your dashboard, it's a good idea to maybe like look through the library of what components you can have within Dash. You can also create your own custom ones. I've never had to or even thought to do that, but you can create your custom ones. I don't know the process of doing that, but most things that you need to do, you can probably create through like some sort of core component. So if you would like your dashboard to have drop down, here's the code for drop down. Something else is pretty cool. There's like drop down with like multi-select. So let's say you want to compare, actually a pretty good use case for this is, let's say you're doing like a sports project and you want to look at stats of different players and compare them with each other. You can potentially have like a drop down list of like all of your different players and then just have them all pop up on a graph. So that's a pretty neat one that you can do. And this is like a multiple drop down list. And I think this one, quite a few students have used for EDA, especially sports EDA, just if anyone's curious. So I know we're jumping back and forth a lot, but yeah. Okay. So this is what we have on this top left part. And then in exactly the same way, we have a drop down and a radio item on the right side. So that's the layout of this top gray bar here. If you ever wanted to edit like colors and stuff, that can be done in the style. I think it's as a dictionary. You can pretty much look up how to do that in the Dash documentation. I think the Dash documentation is one of the more user-friendly ones. Cool. So we've talked about the layout of this top part. So that's all in this div here. And so the next div I have in the same nesting, I guess, is the graphs. So this part I'm going to it gets a little bit more complicated because you're wondering, well, these graphs are so large, how come there's less code? So within this, you can see that there are kind of two divs here, kind of. So on the left side, we just have a single graph. And it's not within its own div, but it leans to the left. And then so that graph here is this scatter plot here. So you can even see, excuse me, you can even see that the ID is cross filter indicator scatter. And that's like I guess, the 2 indicators scatter plot. And then on the right side, we have another div with the 2 graphs. There's an X time series and a Y time series. Basically, that's just to show that, all right, this is the time series of whatever indicators on the X axis, and this is for whatever's on the Y axis. So that's, again, the layout of that. You might notice, okay, how does it know what to plot over there? That's where callbacks come in, and I'm going to get to callbacks later. But for now, what works here is just a placeholder. You can sort of think of this as a placeholder. It's just some graph with just an ID and some hovering data. So this will come back to in a little bit. But the last thing on this dashboard is this slider. And it's just a slider here that adjusts the years. And this is actually below everything. So if you sort of like, if you were to like draw a line across this right here, the slider is below everything. So that's why the slider, it's kind of like its own thing in its own div. So that's the layout of the graph. And you can see that like with that, it helps a lot if you just think about where you want the elements of your dashboard to go. Setting this up will be a lot easier, whether you like nest it in divs or like, have it go top to bottom. I will tell you that my very first dashboard, because I didn't want to bother with all these divs, I had like a long vertical scroll dashboard because I just did not want to deal with, putting things side by side. And that's okay. I mean, I feel like, our goal is not to create the most beautiful dashboard. We're data scientists. And as long as we can, visualize and showcase our visualizations, that's good enough, in my opinion. Unless you want to go and be like a visualization dashboarding consultant, then sure. But I feel like for most of us, as long as we can put the graph somewhere somehow, that's good enough. Okay, so yeah, I wouldn't spend too much time like fussing over all of this like HTML, like this goes here, this goes here. All right, so before we get into callbacks, I want to highlight that every single element has an ID. So I didn't talk about this, I didn't like point this out earlier, but every drop-down list has an ID, every radio item has an ID, every graph, and even like these are the placeholders for the graphs. Actually, this becomes less important now, so let me zoom back in. So every graph, even though this is just a placeholder, has an ID. These IDs are very, very important. It's very important that you name your elements something that you will be able to identify the element with. Because that's what you're going to use for callbacks. And that's what you're going to use to say, okay, if I update my slider, I have to update this graph. So that's important when it comes to creating callbacks. So to talk about callbacks, let's start with an easier one first. Actually, no, this would be the easier one, even though it looks crazy. Okay. So how a callback works, it is basically a decorator on a function. Actually, let me just reshare because I think we can sort of remember what this looks like. So let me reshare my screen so it's not going to be overwhelming. Okay. All right, so for callbacks, a callback is a decorator function. Decorator functions for data science, not super important, but anytime you see like an @ sign above a function, it basically tells, I guess, Python that your function is doing something different from what a normal function does. I think for our purposes, that's all we need to know about decorator functions. So this decorator tells our program that this function update graph is going to take in inputs and outputs from somewhere else. So this function is called update graph. And what it does is this function actually outputs or changes the output of our scatter plot. Let me just do this again. That function basically, no matter what you change, so let's say I change this, it's going to update this one scatter plot. That's what that one callback does. So if you take a look at just the decorator itself, let me zoom in, you can see that there's one output. And the one output is cross-filter indicator scatter, which is the placeholder name that we had for the scatter plot. And it outputs a figure. And then that scatter plot actually takes in what five different inputs. So it takes in inputs from the cross filter X and Y axis column and type. So basically it takes in inputs from this dropdown, this radio item, that's 1 and 2, this dropdown and this radio item, 3 and 4, and then lastly, this slider. So the output of this scatter plot can be affected by all these 5 elements. And so we have to account for all of that. So that's why in that app callback, which was this one, it's a list of 5 inputs. And so the syntax is just dash.dependencies.input, and it's stored as a list here. And you just list the 5 IDs of the 5 components that will affect that one graph. The order of this doesn't matter so much in terms of like the order of these don't matter. What it does affect though is the order of this update graph function. So as you can see here in this update graph function, it takes in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 arguments. And the 5 arguments have to correspond to the order of these inputs. So therefore, these arguments are x-axis column name, y column name, x and y-axis type, and then the year value. And basically, it'll read the value from one of those elements and update the graph. So as you can see here, I know this is going to be very specific to whatever graph you're doing, but these arguments will come back here. So for example, it's going to take year value from your slider. It's going to take year value, and it's going to subset that data frame that we had earlier based on the year. And then it's also going to subset that data frame even more based on the X and Y column name, which is going to come from here. So that's how the different parts of your dashboard are able to interact with each other. So yeah, you have your column name here. If it's type, if it's linear or log, it adjusts that as well. And then finally, it plots your data. So it just plots this data. And this is just more complicated syntax of like plotting Plotly. It's actually pretty straightforward. Just with all of the filtering being done within the function, it looks more complicated. But it's basically plotting the graph and just subsetting that big data frame in different ways based on the different inputs. Cool. I know that was a lot, but does anyone have any like questions to clarify or thoughts regarding this? Cool. If this is very overwhelming, because I know that this is a pretty intense example with like 5 inputs and like 1 output, the Plotly documentation has a lot of examples. So I think there's like a bunch of good examples. Where are the examples? Is it here? Yeah, I guess there's a library of examples somewhere. I guess if I find it, I will share it with you all. But yeah, basic dash callbacks. For example, like you can have text. This is actually a really good one if you're doing like an NLP project and you're trying to input some text. You can actually code in your like pre-processing and your like modeling predict code between the input and output. So when you type in something, it'll like run that raw text through your model and output your prediction. That's pretty neat. That's something that you can do. But yeah, I think the Dash documentation, it looks like a lot now, but like just sit down with it for a few hours and I think it'll make more sense. I'm more than happy to help debug this. For some background, actually, this was our phase 1 project like 3 years ago when I was a student. So I've seen a lot of Dash, a lot of Plotly and Dash. Let's see, what else do I have to mention? Yeah, all the rest of these are kind of the same. These callbacks basically update the line plots on the right-hand side. So it doesn't have to take in as many inputs. So it just takes the input from like X time series, X-axis type, X-axis column, this scatter plot, and then updates this. So yeah. Hopefully this helps to break down code for dashboards. I know it's a lot, but yeah, before I move on to talking about how you can turn this into a dashboard to launch on the web. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, so let me reshare my screen again. And let me, actually before that, let me pull up that repo. And while I'm pulling it up, if anyone has any questions, feel free to shout them out. Let's see. Oh, where did I put it? Okay. All right, let me just reshare my screen real quick. Okay, so this is my desktop. Let me just clear this as well. The zip file that I sent you all is flask-demo. And if you look at it, let me zoom in a little bit more. There are actually 3 different templates in here. Today, I'm just going to talk about the Dash template, but next week I'll talk about the others. And depending what your project is, you might want to do a different kind of like front end. But today I'm just going to talk about the Dash one. CD into Dash. And the way that you launch your dashboard is you're going to do python app.py. And I'll talk about why that is later. But if you just want to run the template to see what it looks like, just do python app.py. It's going to take a little bit of time to load everything up. But when it does, something's going to pop up saying, perfect. Looks like an error, but it's, okay. I was hoping this wouldn't happen, but let me just test this out real quick. It could be the fact that I'm running JupyterDash at the same time. Cool, okay. Well, it's probably because I'm running the same thing on the same address. But basically, when you run that, you'll get a local address where your Dash is running. And when that's running, you can just copy and paste that into your browser, and then your dashboard will pop up. And then from this, I'll also send out, not today, but I'll send out next week, a list of instructions on how you can take this and host it on a website. But before you can do that, you have to first take your code out of Jupyter Notebook into a bunch of scripts. And so that's what I want to show you all next. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to launch my Atom. I know some of you might use like VS Code, Spider, whatever, PyCharm, all the same. But my text editor of choice is Atom. So as that opens, cool. So this is a slightly different app, but basically, this is pretty much all the code from JupyterDash, just copied and pasted. All the same imports. This is a different dashboard. So when you open it on your system, you're going to see a different dashboard with, actually, this is a simpler callback. So if you're doing anything, feel free to use this one as well. But same thing, you can pretty much copy and paste everything onto just a Python file called app.py. If you're pulling in any pre-trained objects, like if you're pulling in like a CSV or any pickle files or like any model files, maybe you have like, I don't know, part of your pipeline is that you want to save and use in your dashboard. Make sure that you export those as well. And you can load them up in here. So you can see here, I'm opening here I'm using like a Teasney model. So I have that opened here. I have a CSV file. And then same thing, I pretty much just copy and paste what I do in JupyterDash. Here you can see I have like a simpler layout. I have all my callbacks written there. You have to have this last thing at the end. Similar to the first line, I don't know why you need that. I mean, you do need that, but I don't know what it does. But you just need that there in order to run the dashboard. And then, yeah, once this is here, you'll be able to run your dashboard. It just has to export everything into a Python file, because when you want to put something onto a website, it's not going to be able to read Jupyter Notebook files. So pretty much copy and paste. The only thing to note is you might have some additional like files that you need to import or open up within your Python file. And if you try and run like Python app.py and something doesn't work, usually the error message in your terminal will tell you what you're missing. But yeah, once you have this, putting it onto something like Heroku, if anyone's heard of Heroku yet, or yeah, Heroku is usually the one that most people use. I'll send out like a list of instructions to do that because I think, yeah, those resources will explain a lot better than I can. But yeah, let me see if I can get this one to run. Let me close this one out. Let's see, this is the one I had open previously. Yeah, as I'm trying to relaunch that one, does anyone have any questions on dashboarding? Cool. Cool. I can tell you why this error occurred. This error occurred because I was running this on the same local address. And so it said that the port is already in use. So therefore I cannot launch this other one. So I would just have to like close out everything properly and then reopen it again. So I forget how to do that off the top of my head. So we're not going to do that right now. But yeah, that's all I had to share regarding dashboarding. Again, more than happy to help you all debug. Also very important to state that this is not a requirement for your capstone. I'm more than happy to like talk about it even after graduation. So if you ever have any questions on like creating a dashboard, feel free to just let me know. I spent a lot of time debugging dashboards over the past couple of years. So more than happy to talk about it. All right. Yeah, that's all I had to share. Before I close out for today, does anyone have any questions about anything? All right, well, I'm glad I got to see some of your faces today. Hopefully I'll see you all back here on Wednesday. Oh, another call to don't forget to book one-on-ones with me. I would love to get to know your projects and stuff that you're doing starting this week. And then, yeah, I said this at the beginning, but then the Wednesday sessions are moved back to 7 to 8 Eastern. So I'll see you on Wednesday at 7 Eastern. Sweet. All right. Well, it was good seeing you all. If you need anything, reach out to me on Slack at any time. And yeah, if there's nothing else, I will see you all on Wednesday. Thank you all for coming. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.